And I have generalized it to include all of the southern Appalachian and Florida panhandle areas as being what could be described as an ancient natural reserve for a completely urbanized, industrialized, post-industrialized civilization, terrestrial to Earth, but alien to human, most likely of reptilian origin, that the Muslims refer to as the Bin, we refer to as the Draco, reptilians, Saurians, what have you, and these primordial ancient beings whose corruption is inherent in the very DNA makeup of every single human being of any race on Earth, for all races were genetically engineered to be compatible workforce slaves of a self-replicating livestock, intelligent livestock. The same fate and actions that prompted the strike against them from even greater forces, extraterrestrial to us, extra-dimensional to us, ultra-dimensional to us, that invaded our world through various occult methodologies and are now known forward as the Jinn. They have many names across many different tongues. We can refer to them, though, best described as the Jinn. An unseen, invisible, but highly advanced, highly complex society that we can more easily understand nowadays through the lens of fantasy or science fiction, of multi-species civilizations, as kingdoms created between different fantasy races, each with their own powers, abilities, and elements. In fact, the Jinn themselves not only are physically built on a fire elemental plane, fire and air, as we are an element of water and earth, but that Jinn themselves classify as either earth, wind, fire, or water along the elemental levels of reality. There are lords, there are kings, there are countries, there are tribes, there are armies, there are Jinn that are good, there are Jinn that are evil. They all have free will. The races of man, Adama, the red-skinned man, who became the men of Native Americans, Latin Americans, or indigenous Latin Americans, Aztecs, Mayans, South Americans, the various indigenous plains, tribes, Canadians, First Nationers, Alaskans. These red-skinned men, also present across the world, are the sons of Shem. You can trace themselves back to the original design of man, Adama, the red dirt man. Black-skinned, dark-skinned people, the sons of Ham from Noah, can trace themselves back symbolically to Eve, herself dark-skinned, as a companion to the red-skinned man, intentionally, intelligently created as such. And then the red-haired ginger phonetic type, which ran, which fled, which rejected its purpose as a companion to coexist with the red-skinned man originally, even before Eve was created. A much older species, as old as the original Adamic man, but that lived in self-imposed isolation genetically, creating a distinct feature, as well as culturally and socially refusing more times than not to coexist or to interbreed or to intermingle. These became the red-haired, what we are known as the sons of Japheth, or the sons of Lilith. And that revolutionarily we would discuss the geographies of the ancient biblical world where this occurred as basically North America and South America, as well as the Caribbean. But these were radically different geographically because of the ages they occurred in, with the first age being completely alien, of a world that is hard to imagine, a world under a purple sky during the day, and one where the stars were projected intensely into the night sky through the vapor dome, an unbreaking global cloud that radically changed the weather patterns, as well as warmed up the world to the point there was no winters. It was like a nuclear winter in terms of the constant humid summer of high radiation due to the volcanic activities. But at the same time, one of darkness, where the sun never truly shone, and the brightest it got was that of a rainy day. Due to the radiation, creatures and intelligent beings grew monumentous, titanic, insatiably hungry, predatory, as well as developed mutations that would border on the nightmarish. We're talking insects that could bite and sting or lay their eggs directly into living flesh, where their offspring would hatch and devour a person from the inside out. We're talking spiders and scorpions, as well as reptiles like snakes that could deliver venom enough to kill men, as they still can today. We're talking about leviathans in the oceans that grew to hundreds of feet long, etc., 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 as well as the inarguable fact that man coexisted during this time with a dominant reptilian power, a draconic power, that we would represent today as dinosaurs. This being proven in the fossil record, with human footprints and dinosaur footprints having been formed at the same time throughout North America, especially in Texas, for example, point towards the inarguable fact that this original epoch, this original era of creation occurred in North or South America. And I argue that it was the originated in Genesis occurred in North and South America. Mankind did not remain in North and South America. It was spread, cast out, and forced to multiply, to be fruitful, because of its purpose as a livestock slave species, the Enkidu, for those who are Sumerian of persuasion. That is 100% the classic beginning of mankind as a very ignoble, abused, purposed creature. One cast literally into the wilderness of hardships from the immediacy of creation. But unsteadily, the idea of it during the book of Adam and Eve, for example, where Adam and Eve take Satan in the form of the serpent to be their god after being tricked or seduced to disobey God. That had happened. Adam and Eve were worshiping Satan in the form of a serpent as the false god. But not because that Satan tricked them, but Satan had created them in the form of the demiurge, the form of the serpent, the form of Abraxas. And these reptilian, archonic, draconic super predators had realized to domesticate mankind, to domesticate the intelligent life, could benefit them by creating not only a labor force, as well as a food source, but also perversely grew as a source of entertainment, waging wars amongst them, running the most heinous vices from these reptilian cities. Remember, sustained both subterranean and above ground due to the vapor dome. Once these higher powers, these heavenly hosts, invaded the earth and destroyed the draconic empire, liberating mankind, it was done so, ironically, by the very extermination of most of the living, corrupted, genetically engineered, nanotechnology-infused, transhumanist, created human livestock that were fully subservient and fully loyal to these false reptilian gods. They were the enemies of their very liberators, or the very liberating force that had arrived on Earth to save their souls. This was done by shattering the vapor dome with the arrival of the moon, which at the time, and still is, was an artificially created battle station akin to the Death Star. The massive gravitational disturbance that it caused by locking itself into orbit, as well as the weaponry aboard and used by the Astro High Command, destroyed the vapor dome, unleashing a deluge of stored water, as well as fluctuating the gravitational fields of Earth so strongly that water normally kept on subterranean oceans was pulled forward into the surface. This created many new oceans in the world, specifically the Atlantic Ocean, as well as a never-before-seen body of water known as the Interior Coastal Seaway, according to conventional geologists. Paleontologists know of this well. It was a warm, shallow sea, literally filled with ancient sharks and sea monsters of various kinds, including megalodons, that could swim from the north coast of Canada and Alaska all the way across Canada and the United States, from the Rocky Mountains to the west, to the Appalachian Mountains to the east, and the Great Canadian Shield to the northeast. They could swim in this inland ocean all the way down to Baja, California, or the Gulf Coast of Texas. North America, as well as South America, were veritable water worlds. Most of what we know is North America, from Mexico to the Colorado Rockies, relieving Appalachia, to the northeast to the Canadian Shield. The rest was underwater. It was basically a water world, with thousands of miles in between any remaining land masses, mostly the peaks of mountains. After this flood, the deluge, the chosen to survive and resettle pure of genetic stock each tribe and family representative of the three original races, the red, the black, and the ginger, as well as Noah, a pure, blonde, blue-eyed mutation, genetic mutation, who at the time was so shocking and aberrant, as I explained before, that his father had to seek counsel as to the explanation of this. And he was described as having to be so white that he glowed in the dark. He was like translucent. He was luminescent. Noah and his direct descendants from his wives, and yes, I know the sons of Noah, that's all metaphorical. The sons of Noah, as he was the patriarch, and this is the time of patriarchs, mind you, that they would form the Noahide priest class, what is known in the Americas as the Veracochian dynasties. They were blue-eyed, blonde-haired, Caucasians, Caucasoids, that served as literally the ruling priest class and emperor class over the surviving tribes of humanity. It was this time that the monolithic pyramid cities across the Western Hemisphere were created. Unfortunately, given human nature, war never changes. And over time, mankind's worst nature, most violent nature, most savage nature, no matter how civilized or advanced, mankind had become in a one world, one nation, planetary society. War and the aims of hostility. First at the heavenly host that had liberated them, once again, choosing to go to war against the extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional jinn, sent by God, by the way, sent by Allah, to free mankind. But in our evil of our hearts, that was programmed into our very genetics by these reptilian forces, choosing to go to war with them, caused the Tower of Babel to fall. When the Tower of Babel fell, Bab-el, the language of the gods, fell, mankind was thrust into confusions, chaos, and then that one world empire, that old world order, went to war amongst itself, and had, for the first time, civil wars against independent empires, no longer loyal to a supreme authority, no longer loyal to each other. And out of this war came the first genocides. Out of this war came slavery. Out of this war came all evils of war. The salting of earth, the razing of cities, house by house, the destruction wholesale of culture and society, and eventually the full erasure from the books of life and history. Literally the scattering of ashes into the sea. During those days, the Great Intercoastal American Seaway, as I previously described, this now temporary result, or this ocean that was now a temporary result of the Great Flood, was beginning to dry, as its waters receded into the subterranean aquifer system under America's great interior. It was drying at a remarkable pace, forcing humanity at the time, remember, existing on the East Coast and the West Coast, to both scramble to seize as much of the exposed new land as possible, and to fear the effects, ramifications, and to seek to blame those responsible for such ecological disaster, not understanding, in the state of confusion that they had been cast into, that this was all stoking the fires that eventually would burn the whole known world down. These were not primitive peoples. They had built thousands of cities, each with pyramids, stone highways, interior systems that would rival anything in the modern world. Their cities, now overgrown with jungles, are now just being discovered. And what is discovered cannot be reproduced by modern man. These are the legendary cities of Machu Picchu, the great monolithic cities across America and South America, and Mexico. Mexico has hundreds of thousands of these structures, tens of thousands of pyramids. There are more pyramids that are yet to be discovered in Mexico that have ever been found in Egypt, that have ever been found in Africa, that have ever been found across the Middle East or Europe. There have been pyramids found in Europe. Yes. There have been pyramids found in Egypt. Yes. There have been tens of thousands of pyramids already discovered in Mexico. There have been tens of thousands of pyramids already discovered across Central America. And there are literally tens of thousands of pyramids that are being discovered across the Amazon, Venezuela, Brazil, etc. It is uncontrovertible to understand the sheer infrastructure and sophistication, the advancements of the peoples of the West, and how ancient those advancements were made. And it's obvious the biblical roots of the ancient American lands. But that fire that would burn the world down was what we know as the war between Atlantis and Mu. Now, I don't know exactly what the timeline was for this, but it was recent. Jason Brashears of Archaex states the fall of Atlantis to be around 1800. This is perfectly in keeping with the ideas of cyclical apocalypse. For we do know there were great events that caused entire worldwide empires to collapse. These events would also cause mass depopulation. Everything could be on the table, from a type of nuclear war, using a type of weapon of mass destruction, biological, chemical strikes using viruses, man-made viruses of unknown lethality, atmospheric weapons causing storms, never before seen storms, famines, droughts. What is known, though, is that at the end of it, the lands of Mu and the lands of Atlantis were never the same. Their empires forever broken up. The survivors, a fraction of their original number, mostly surviving in the wilderness, either unable to return to or unwilling to return to their former way of life, their former society, their former organizational structures, their former cities, their former homes. After this war between Mu and Atlantis, the world was forever different, and a new age began. Now we have people from these old world empires who truly are the legacy of these societies, having kept the advancements, although they are exiles and outlaws of the previous old world order. They are now the torch bearers, the light keepers, the keepers of the flame, the old ancient mystery keepers who have memories of original religions, original maps, original lifestyles, original cultures, original technologies, original Atlantean or Mu, Lemurian or American ways of life, from religion to occult practice. And remember, on the east you have exiles, on the west you have exiles. Survivors, yes, but these people were unorthodox. They were heretical even when in their time they lived alongside Atlantis. There may be authorities that were more loyal, more akin to the status quo, as it were. But ultimately you get the deviations, you get the derivations, as well as it being the age of chaos, after the fall of Tower of Babel. These colonies form cults. They form societies based on different individual eccentricities. Locations play a big part in this formation of culture, as does the ability to travel by sea. For all we can deduce, the Atlantic colonies of the Western and coastal European continent, as well as Mediterranean and North African, saw a great scattering of ancient Atlantean societies that would become the Phoenicians, that would become the Etruscans, later Romans, that would become the Canaanites, that would become what we would know as Egyptians, the pharaonic dynasties of Egypt, what we would know as the Greeks, the ancient Irish, the Druids, the Celts, the Gauls, the Iberians, the Baltics. All of these people would be direct Atlantean descendants. Now we'll get back to this in a minute. But keep that in mind while I'm talking about what's happening in North and South America, because I'm not denying by this time, the fall of Atlantis, there are thriving, healthy, multi-generational colonies. Maybe not noble, maybe not ethical, absolutely bloodthirsty, savage fucking heathens, to the core, by the way, and by modern perspective. Phoenicians, for example, were exiled because they worshipped Moloch, and they preferred to sacrifice babies. as a preferred form of abortion, through ritual sacrifice, where they threw babies in a fucking fire. That's not an over-exaggeration, nor is it an understatement. That's just a factual presentation of what worshipping Moloch is about. They also made purple dyes and sold capes to rich people. So there's that. They were fashion designers who liked throwing babies into fires. So they had a queen as well. They believed women should rule. Queen Dido. Take that for what it is. You have the pharaonic dynasties, who think they're literally the sons of the sun. The sun god, Amun-Ra. Take that for what you will. You have, various types of peoples. The Greeks, bunch of pedos who enjoy slavery and hanging out butt naked talking about philosophy and eating olives. Great fucking lot of guys those were, right? Fucking ancient Greeks and shit. The Atlanteans produced those. So you have all of this shit, right? And they're all doing their best to live their fucking lives, just like how the American colonists did their best to create societies, build cultures, form states, create the new nation. And they didn't constantly refer to themselves as being British. At some point, it became a new thing. Like, oh, we live in the state of New York. We're Americans. I know it's the American colony of York, and we're technically British, but at some point we got to cut the umbilical cord and just pretend that we have nothing to do with these people and that we're our own thing, even though we're identical to these people and everything except language. And even then, we're separated by a common language. Do you see how a war between, for example, ancient Greece and Atlantis could play out, hypothetically? And I mean this in terms of, you see how when Atlantis falls, and Atlantis' navy, which survives whatever the fuck happens to them, goes on the fucking rampage for supplies, but realizes that every single port of the colonies is independent, hostile, and doesn't even recognize the Atlanteans really anymore as authorities. You see a series of wars between these colonies and a mysterious group of people from the sea. This is Atlantis. Everyone knows this. This is the West, the Western world. These men came on flotillas of ships. They would ravage entire coasts. They would destroy entire kingdoms. They would use tactics and weaponry, and the men were strong and brave fighters, capable of taking on 5, 10 other men in a fight. These were genetically engineered super soldiers. These ships were modern metal ships of war. Their tactics were clearly from astute masters of strategy. But over time, this threat disappeared. Not because the locals, Ramses, the Pharaohs, the Greeks, the Hittites, the Mediterraneans, the Phoenicians, not because these people were able to defeat them, and in fact they were at their mercy, but because those people returned back to the West. Whatever had happened had calmed down enough. Radiation, poison, the viruses, whatever, had calmed down enough for them to return to the West and rebuild again, to return again to these old ancestral homelands. This, though, would again, as well as the difficulty of traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, kind of form an isolation between the West and the East, where those of the West would be busy focusing on the matters of the West, and those in the East will be busy focusing on the matters of the East. There was interchange, there was trade, for we know that there are pharaonic tombs, as well as, remember, this is an old colony, so there always were family connections, tribal connections, memories, maps, etc. between the East and the West. This was secret royal knowledge. We found cocaine, for example, in Egyptian pharaoh tombs, meaning that at some point there was active trade between the East and the West. There wasn't always war. But the arrival of this ravenous Atlantean naval fleet after the fall of Atlantis basically destroyed the colonial the colonial East of Africa, Europe, the Mediterranean, destroyed their navy, destroyed their naval abilities, destroyed their ports, destroyed their port cities, and no doubt killed a countless number of veteran sailors, or coastal maritime engineers, shipwrights, for example, sail makers, net makers, the men of the sea. That or took them prisoner. This is recorded. This put basically the East, Europe, the Mediterranean, Africa, into a naval dark age. Where traveling across the Mediterranean was difficult, if not sometimes impossible. This would limit communication, added to the already chaotic confusion of the era of its fall of Babel, and the Dark Ages of whatever the fuck war between Mu and Atlantis occurred, and set the world back to the Bronze Age standards of feudalism. And now they can't even guarantee safe passage over the ocean. They're basically stuck in whatever countries they're in, unless they can walk, or take a camel, or a caravan, or horses, whatever, take a pilgrimage, and unless they can communicate and keep safe borders open, they're fucked. This is why Romans get famous for building roads. Where do they build roads? Across the Mediterranean, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. They build bridges. Because things like this are crucial. And if you're colonizing Europe from the coast inward, infrastructure does not exist. There's no roads anywhere. It's just fucking forests and shit like that. And no doubt the peoples that were here were the colonists who had either chosen this lifestyle or had gone feral, devolving due to the primal and chthonic nature of such wilderness. This is where you get your Germanic tribes. This is where you get your Celts, your Gauls, things like that. People of the forest, Druids. They're not the oldest tribes. They're actually the youngest tribes in Europe. They're the youngest tribes as civilizations on the coast. The Greeks, the Romans, the Etruscans, the Iberians, the Gauls, the Celts, the Irish, the Scottish, the British, the Baltics, all that shit. They're the ones who are the oldest. They're the ones who have the greatest ancestral ties to even older societies. This is why you still find basically no man's lands with no infrastructure in the Swiss Alps. You find places that are fucking surreal and bizarre and isolated and cut off all across Europe. You would think if people lived here for thousands of years, it would be a very interconnected, it would just be a massive highway system the Romans developed. It's just one big fucking loop that just takes you from the border of Russia all the way across northern Europe, goes across through Spain, and then loops around back, and you can just loop around Europe if you wanted to. You would think that would just make sense, but it didn't, because no one really had agreed to this, and even the construction of it during Dark Age feudalism is impossible. It's fucking super difficult. But even what they did was thousands and thousands of kilometers with this, near timeless fucking road systems. The aqueducts, for example, still work. This is what they had to build to be able to survive in Europe. That's just, to create from nothing, really, the European, Middle Eastern, and African colonies. Now, the Americas already had pyramids. Americas already had cities, giant Pueblo cities, and up south and west, carved into caves, carved into mountainsides. These are the cities, the remnants of even greater metropolises that were either abandoned to exposure and weathering the elements or outright destroyed. At this point, though, the seaway has completely dried up. There are massive, maybe lakes or rivers. The Mississippi River was probably twice the size of it is now, for example, in width and depth. And California still had the Salton Sea from Baja California, separating California off into an island, right? But otherwise, North America, the map of North America, is almost identical to the country that we live in now. It's almost identical in South America, too, to what we know now as South America. But this explains, because the water has receded, why there are still hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of square miles of empty, flat land, historically, without cities, without trees, without people, except for nomadic people that only ventured there to follow buffalo. And that these areas have extremely harsh and difficult extreme weather, tornadoes, derechos, blizzards, extreme heat in the summer, and extreme cold in the winter. That most of America, especially most of Canada, is inhospitable during the winter. Without infrastructure, shelter, fire, energy sources, power, electricity, etc., you would freeze to death throughout most of America for months. For months. It is Arctic conditions. It is colder in Chicago than it is in Antarctica for some of the time of the year. That's a fact. That's fucking nuts. All of Canada is above the Arctic Circle, basically, with most of the Canadian population living on the border with the United States. The most southern place most of the Canadians can possibly move. It's fucking ridiculous. They want you to believe that this is normal. This is clearly the result of some kind of fucking apocalyptic ecological collapse or nightmare or fucking disaster. And such we get modern day America and South America. The South America becoming an overgrown, like the Amazon rainforest, basically, appearing in the remains and ruins of the cities that were formerly conquered, or formerly occupied by the Kingdom of Kush. And then the genocide of the black-skinned people in the West occurred, and forced them all into either exile into Africa or slavery, with no one caring to even take the cities. And that's how disregarded they were, destroyed or razed to the ground. they were considered cursed to oblivion in time. The jungles reclaimed those. So now at this point, we can start to see the Amazon jungle, which is completely artificial, by the way, completely artificial, growing on the ruins of highways, city streets, buildings, pyramids, homes, etc., etc. You know, it's 100% those trees are growing literally on carved rock, carved stone, asphalt, etc. And this is being proven with LiDAR every fucking day. Look at the advancements. The Amazon rainforest is artificial, and it is built. Not only did it come from gardens created by man, it is growing mostly on cities left by men. And those cities line the Amazon River. As above, so below means that North America and South America both used to look identical, like if they were symmetrical, because they had the Mississippi River, which will now be known as the Nile River, as we talked about this, and the Amazon River of the South American continent. Well, let's get into this North American area, right? You have the West Coast people still living in, scrambling in, trying to survive. Actually, pretty much undestroyed. South America begins to rebuild and thrive with the Incan peoples, right? The Veracochians and things like that. The people I said before, they regained this old world, ancient world ruling system of Mu still, where the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Caucasoid priest class and ruling class are still considered gods. And they continue this behavior for longer than anyone in South America. Literally a state system that is almost identical to the old Amurian Mu system of government. North America, Atlantis completely fallen. The survivors living in the frontiers, they begin to thrive. Remember, the red-haired race of Lilith thrives at hunting in the wilderness. Its spiritual patron is Samael, the angel of the hunt. That's their literal spiritual husband. These people become, almost archetypically, those that we still see today in America. The camo wearing, deer hunting, beer drinking, typically considered Scots-Irish, American rednecks. Why are they called rednecks? Because when they get hot, angry, or in the sun, their skin becomes red. I know I'm breaking it down fucking rocket science style, but stay with me here. These ginger-type Edomites, what they're later be called Edomites in the East, are always associated with hunting, violence, and having red hair. I believe in the Atlantean world, they engaged in genetic engineering to create super soldiers, what we would know as super mutants, people with genetic strength and power, physiologies that were superior to normal people. And I believe that one of the products of this was the creation of red-haired, large men who were 7 feet tall on average, men who may have had 6 fingers, 2 sets of teeth, may have had full body hair growth, enough to be considered a separate species, a subspecies, but one that was still as intelligent as any other human being. Maybe they were some were idiots, maybe some were meatheads, jocks, etc., whatever, but still human, intellectually. These people, having seen the devastating error of the ways of the old world, chose to live in the frontier lands. But I believe also that the groups that stayed within the organizational structures of the cities recreated Atlantis. Remember, now it's always located in the west, although it be the Atlantic coast of the west, into a city, or into a giant city, a city the size of this nation, that wasn't the frontier. And that was known as Babylon. That is in modern-day New York City. That is in modern-day the metropolis of either New York City or even, I would say New York City. I would say that's the metropolis of New York City, absolutely. Believe it or not, these cities, like when they say it's the Empire State, they are referring to, it is the state of the empire. It is literally the center of this Atlantean empire in their reference points. Philadelphia is literally a biblically ancient city that's referred to as the Church of Philadelphia, as Philadelphia is these ancient cities. It did not happen in the Middle East first, and that name wasn't carried from the biblical Middle East to America, to the West, by colonists who were Christians, who just loved reading the Bible. And they named all the shit around them, Babylon, Lebanon, Cyprus. They named it all these different biblical names. They didn't name Memphis, Tennessee, because they knew ancient Egypt had a city named Memphis. These were the original names of these old kingdoms. And I'll get to Memphis, Tennessee. I'll get to that in a second. But I want to make that point clear. This is what happened to Atlanta. I'm going to work my way across from the east to the west. is they become Babylon. They become biblical Babylon. In the center, from the south of Appalachia, basically the entirety of Mississippi River Valley, along that river, to the south, to New Orleans, the Crescent City, the fertile Crescent City. And that delta, 1/3 of a territory to the east and 2/3 of a territory to the west, was a land called Goshen. This is really a complex matter of nomenclature only, because you have to think, you have individuals, you have people, you have tribes, then you have communities, then you have clans and nations. They all have different names. And then you have countries, states, shit like that. Like you can have Washington, D.C. And if you say D.C., it represents the leadership specifically located in the capital. But it can also mean America, like D.C.'s interest abroad. And our nomenclature means America's interest abroad. America is the land, it's the people, it's the tribe with different synonyms. Goshen and Babylon in the Bible are the same. They have the same power structure. And they are the same, although they may be unique individual capitals, cities, empire states, nations, lands, or whatever, general terms for, and specific terms for, certain aspects within one model. But Goshen is made of Atlantean survivors. It is made by people who have either blood relationship, allegiance, or loyalty to the rulers of Atlantean survivors on the East Coast. And all this time, remember, the hairy red man is still out amongst us in the frontier. In fact, one of these hairy red men, who is living an extreme off-the-grid lifestyle, performs one of the most high-profile assassinations in the history of the world when Esau, the hairy man, kills King Nimrod, literally king of the one world government, at least the surviving elements of the one world government. Because the details of the story, that this king is choosing to hunt and only brings 2 bodyguards and is ambushed and jumped and murdered by one highly skilled wild man, makes me think that this was purely the last symbolic leader in name only of a society that had collapsed. A society that couldn't even spare more than 2 bodyguards for the king, the most important king of a one-world system. After this, I believe that Atlantis and that system was forever over. And Babylon, which had rejected the ancient name of Atlantis, but had kept the spirit, ancient family, they had known that caused doom. They had known that old world of Mu and Atlantis had brought destruction and death. And they had rejected it ideologically, built new systems. So these were the old survivors of the old world. Land of Goshen was the now newly agricultural center of a mostly slave economy, where the black slaves from the Empire of Kush were forced to work on plantations. Now, in the highly fertile former seabeds of the Mississippi River, which we know biblically as the Nile River, but was called back then the Isis River, or the River of Isis. These people were the people of Goshen, and just like as represented, there was a ruling class of pure Egyptians, and there were various slave castes that had specific purposes, including making bricks, mortar, and masonry. And that tribe was the Semitic peoples from Yosemite, the western lands, which could now be reached by the now former Atlantean survivors inherit to the Babylon Goshen lands. Hold on 1 second. Let me put up the cap. Okay, so now I fast forwarded all of that, summarized it. The creation of Goshen, what we would know as Egypt in the Bible. This is the occurrence of the Exodus. I remember to the west, where the Semitic people are found, Yosemite is now mostly a desert, with the surviving West Coast colonists completely breaking away, ideologically and culturally, from any sense of unification, and rather investing in the individualization, the separation from each other based on the uniqueness of their family, kin, clan systems that we would know as Indian tribes, Native American tribes. They were no less dangerous, they were no less capable, they were no less powerful in their own territories. But now they had to deal with a radically different geography. In fact, one of the major developments for the land of Mu, specifically of people from the Northwest tribes, was the mastery of horseback warfare, the creation of nomad societies, nomad tribes, of hunters that would follow buffalo and other exotic game, like elk, etc., as well as the establishments of extremely powerful religious cults. The Thunderbird cult of the Hopi, or the Blue Star Conchina cult, for example, the Popol Vuh cult of the Mayan, Southern Mu, the sun worship of the Lakota, including things like they had rituals where they would pierce their skin with hooks and then tie these hooks to a pole and then hang from the hooks that were piercing their skin, what we would call a suspension. It's an extreme type of body bloodletting, mutilation, and pain ritual that would cause an out-of-body experience. They had ascetic cults in Native American tribes across the Southwest that would engage in spirit visions. And these were extremely metaphysical, occultist type rituals of body, extreme endurance and body hardship, like physical hardship, undergoing extreme heat or journeying with extreme dehydration. These are the things that arose out of the ashes of urbanization or technology or modernization, the things that had built the world that had failed them but was still existing in these relics and these ruins, and were inherited by them. And this is where we get a specific group of, let's say, chosen people, because it's a group of these people who originally come from the Yosemite region, making them Semitic people that are relatively very primitive, that are relatively super mystical, that are based on visions and occult knowledge of an ancient world. It is this group of people where a man, who we would call a shaman, who was at the time a patriarchal sorcerer, lived. He was known as Abraham. That name itself has a lot of occultic breakdown to it. The A-Brahmin, the bull man. Guess what he did? He was a rancher, and he had livestock, specifically cows, cattle, bulls. And because of that, because of his people keeping cows, they didn't have to chase them. And knowing of the ancient world, he chose to live full-time in one area, refusing to be nomadic and choosing instead to build a clan and a home. This would allow him time to study, a time to pursue visions, a time to commune with his Lord. I don't need to break down the entire story of Abraham, but all of that occurred from a place originating where Yosemite National Park currently is. This land experienced famine. It was at that time him and his wife Sarah went down to the land of Goshen and found that it was a land of amazing prosperity. Remember, these people are enemies, ancient cultural enemies of the Atlanteans. They think that these people might just kill them. They might just take them as slaves. They fear these people and are intimidated by their success, by their wealth. And as they make their travels, they are treated, though, as dignitaries. They are treated, though, as merchants with respect, because their ways are the ways of the old world, while still being unidentifiable with the ancient system of Mu. The leader of Goshen, the pharaoh at the time, and pharaoh just means king. They probably called him something else, to be honest, who receives Abraham, who is a man of much learning, who is a man of much knowledge, but is too smart for his own good, and decides to try to tempt the king into a sexual relationship with his wife, which he does successfully. He pimps out his wife, saying that he's her brother, etc., to get this type of marriage, intermarriage, right? A polygamy. When the king realizes that what has happened, the king is actually quite shocked and offended that he made him do this, like, quite, weird and sinful thing, and, cucking himself, making him commit adultery against his knowledge, without knowledge, by sleeping with a married woman. To know that there's a lot of, there's a lot of underhanded, dirty tactics amongst the people of Abraham, of Yosemite at this point, a lot of outsider shit. But at this point, he's awarded cattle, he's awarded a lot of wealth, and he's awarded a lot of prestige, just told to go back home, and told not to bother them, especially by taking the woman back, who appears to be some kind of black magician, Jezebel, that drove literally the pharaoh insane with her behavior. And if you know any Semitic women, yeah, that's basically a Semitic woman, all right? And so they returned the Semitic people. They returned to the land of Yosemite, which is like North Utah, North California, Zion National Park area, right? The North California mountains of the West. And it's nice, but they're still experiencing famines. It has a drought. There's massive shortages. The wealth that they get, though, makes them rulers of this land. They got this wealth from Goshen. The children of Abraham decide to go to Goshen and get this wealth back. Remember, I already told you that a lot of this is chronologically created to include landscapes and countries and tribes of this eastern world, of Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. It's not the case. It's from Yosemite. The sons decide to create a war band. They want to pillage and raid. Remember what I said about the West Coast tribes? The West Coast tribes are getting really good at horseback warfare. They're getting really good at hunting and taking slaves of their own, right? Of becoming the savage horseback warriors of the red-skinned tribes. The Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Comanche, etc. They don't all come from these tribes, but first they're Semitic tribes. These spawn of Abraham, the children, the sons of Abraham, go first east along the American-Canadian border, or what is now the American-Canadian border, to Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Michigan. They go to these lands where one of their tribe, a very specific shaman, he has the vision of the Semitic peoples. This vision of the Semitic peoples is of a holy city that is promised to them by their god, a serpent, a dragon, that is named Yahweh, Jehovah. This reptilian serpent, and for those who know the connections between the ancient world, the reptilian world, and the area of the Great Lakes, may very well have been a down extraterrestrial craft. It might have been a reptilian survivor. It might have been a intentional assertion in this area, since the veil between this realm and the other darker realm of the jinn is very thin around the Wisconsin Great Lakes area. And even in Native American folklore, the Great Lakes is the entrance to the underworld, and it's guarded by the water panther and the great serpent. The only thing that keeps the great serpent underwater are the thunderbirds that rule the sky. You can't, it's so obvious that there are reptilians around the Great Lakes area. There are reptilians around the Wisconsin area, for those that really have eyes to see. But at this point, they received the vision of the great holy city, the vision that they were given. They go from the Wisconsin area, the Great Lakes area, down, following the Mississippi River Valley. At this point, they encounter the true might of Goshen. They start seeing the cities, like Memphis, that are built on the river. They start seeing the many patrols, the merchants that are never ending, the fields, the farms, the millions of slaves that are kept regimented. By the time they get to the actual Mississippi River Delta, they realize they have walked into their own slavery. They cannot defeat these people. These people are not savages like they were. They're not struggling to get by, and they're not fat cats grown spoiled by their wealth. These are the survivors of Atlantis. And it's that they peacefully negotiate their own capture. They came in as a raiding party, and when confronted with an actual army of Goshen, they turned themselves in as if though they were willing laborers, seeking employment, seeking sanctuary within the city itself. This is told, for example, in the Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat story, where the 7 brothers who sold Joseph into slavery are caught stealing cattle in Goshen in Egypt, and they are imprisoned. And who decides their fate? The enslaved brother, Joseph, who is one of the rulers of Goshen. This just goes to show that at some point, the bulk of the patriarchs, that of the children of Abraham, as the prophecy of Abraham's prophecy, that Abraham's children would come to rule the world, would come to fill up all places of the world, would come to bear, from Abraham's first visit to Goshen, and his nefarious treachery that rewarded him by whoring out his own wife. What that symbolically recreates are that Abraham's sons, and remember I told you to read this text, the old biblical canon, as metaphors for peoples and tribes, clans, families, and dynasties that are represented as singular people in genealogies and chronologies of the Old Testament. That these Semitic peoples that Abraham produced, that are Abrahamic, that practice a unique and distinct syncretism of new and old occult practices, are taken peacefully as esteemed slaves, as skilled craftsmen. They are given quarter, they're given food, they're given allowance, they're given a place within the caste system and society of Goshen, but they are forced to labor. And in their labors, due to their memory of how the old world created the pyramids that number in the tens of thousands, the land of Goshen sought to create those pyramids using these Semitic architects, these Semitic stonemasons. They did find, however, that these children of Abraham, these Semitic slaves, and slaves as it were, they're in bondage. They are not free to leave until they perform their tasks that they are set. They have to pay taxes. 20% of all they make, all the food they have, etc., has to go to the Goshen, communists, the Pharaonic communists of ancient Egypt, and they have to worship the gods of ancient Egypt. But actually, they're allowed to keep their god, but they got to kiss the ass of the people of Goshen whenever they're asked to. Like, they can keep their specific belief in Yahweh, the serpentine god, the dragon god. They can keep that, because everyone keeps their own gods. But they have to kiss the ass of the Pharaoh's god, which is the sun. And the Hebrews are such big bitches that they're okay with this. They become the Hebrew people. Hebrew from the word Hittite, Hittite from the word Semite. And there is a time, for 400 years, that these Semitic peoples helped build the Americas in the newly dried interior coastal sea, or former sea, of the North American continent. They, though, based on their crazy religious beliefs in nature and their old Lemurian or Murian Mu knowledge, either in an act of protest, disinformation, or absolute unintentional, just how it turns out, end up not building their pyramids. The Hebrews end up not building their pyramids out of stone. They, in fact, create a ideology about how they can't build temples out of hewn stone. And this is represented, for example, in the book of Exodus as a pharaonic decision, as a punishment. But it's also a way of them explaining why there are only a few stone pyramids in Egypt. Specifically when the Pharaoh tells the Hebrew slaves that they will have no mortar or no wheat, no grain or wheat to help build their bricks. Because the bricks are all made from mud that they get from the banks of the Mississippi. That these become the earth mounds. These become the earth mound builders of the dirt pyramids that line the Mississippi and Ohio Valley. There are still massive megalithic level formations and designs made from dirt. And specifically, there are designs of giant serpents, for example, in the Ohio Valley, made of dirt that appear to be giant snakes that you can see from airplanes, that are devouring eggs, etc., that are coiling, that there are hundreds of pyramids across America. Let me see if I can just quickly search this up for an actual count. Let's see. Hold on 1 second. Let me just skip. I'll see. Mound builders, USA. Let me see. Anyway, this is all obviously censored bullshit, by the way. This is all just conventional information, right? See if there's any kind of fucking count. Yeah, so in the mound builder, the conventional history of mound builders, right? This is all conventional Wikipedia type shit. Mound builders stretch from the Great Lakes area, right, with Wisconsin, Michigan, southern Canada, all the way to the east coast along the Appalachian Valley and mountain range, but not the Atlantic coast, right? So the western part of the Appalachians, the Ohio Valley and the Mississippi River Valley specifically. But they stretched all the way down to Florida and Texas. This is the land of Goshen. There are the Hopewell traditions, the Adena cultures, the Troyville cultures, the Baytown cultures, the Coles Creek cultures, the Mississippian culture, the Caddoan Mississippian culture, the Fort Ancient culture, and the Plicomene culture, just to name a few. Right? I mean, and even though looking at, it's just 100% there to research. Basically, though, there were thousands of these structures, of pyramids, of entire cities that were built out of earthen mounds, wood, and bricks made of mud. Everything from amphitheaters, say, for example, Poverty Point in the West Carroll Parish, Louisiana, is a gigantic Greek amphitheater for gatherings. The Watson Break is the oldest known mound complex in North America. These are just different things used by Native American tribes after the fall and everything once the settlers started arriving. So these are what I'm saying. For 400 years, the quote-unquote Hebrews, the Semitic peoples, originating from the western parts of America, Yosemite areas of America, that traveled first originally to Wisconsin and Michigan, until when they encountered the full might of Goshen during their raids, their attempted invasion of Goshen, were in fact captured as slaves but parlayed into skilled laborers. But over 400 years, they grew restless. They grew restless, and having been so responsible for the creation of so much of the infrastructure of Goshen, 400 years is a long fucking time. Imagine the entire history of the United States. That your people arrived in a country during the time of George Washington, and 400 years later, in 2100, your people start demanding freedom. They start demanding power. They start demanding equality. They start demanding either a country of their own within the territories of Goshen where they can be independent and worship their religion to the exclusion of other religions, by the way. This is something that the survivors of Goshen and Babylon find taboo. The exclusion of gods. They don't mind you worshiping any god you choose, but when you tell them they can't worship the wrong god, you become an enemy of all their gods. And it was at this point that the soothsayers and the fortune tellers of the mighty empire of Goshen told the pharaoh of the Nile River, Mississippi River, that he would be surpassed by a Hebrew pharaoh, a king from the Semites, who worshipped the dragon, Yahweh, Jehovah. The serpent-worshipping slaves of the Hebrews, the pharaoh feared and ordered all firstborn sons of the Hebrews to be killed, ritualistically sacrificed, so that they could be destroyed or weakened, intimidated, terrorized. The pharaoh could be demonstrated as all-ruling, supreme over life and death. The cruel sword at the throat of every single Egyptian was the sword of Pharaoh. And if Pharaoh decreed you die, you died. In Goshen, no one could save you from Pharaoh, for Pharaoh was God on earth. It is through that coincidence and convenience, the story, the myth of Moses being saved in the basket, probably an illegitimate son of the daughter of Pharaoh, illegitimate from a Hebrew slave, probably a vizier or a priest. If you watch the Charlton Heston movie, it's very clear that she was just fucking a Hebrew dude, and the Hebrews are all represented as super hot guys, and like the Egyptians are just gay, and so like it's clear that she was getting some slave dick. Like most slave men would give the dick to the plantation owners' daughters and things like that. That was a very much like guess your full service slavery type thing, you know. You're basically a horse, a stud for her. So she has this Hebrew baby, basically. She has a baby, a Hebrew baby Moses. She's also got the fully Egyptian Ramses. Now, at that point, she tries to hide his Hebrewness, his real nature, from Moses. She successfully hides this from the royal courts. This is the story of Moses, born in the capital, born in the seat of power, born literally from the lap of power, the womb of the daughter of the Pharaoh. Upon his own awareness of the struggles, this revolutionary movement of snake-worshipping Semitic peoples that he identifies with, that he becomes to learn and know and realize are his own people. He's looking at the mirror, he's looking at them, he's looking at the mirror, he realizes, oh, I'm circumcised. I guess that's how it went down. He just looks in the mirror long enough and it fucking hits him. I'm circumcised. My foreskin. Oh, I'm like them. And so his loyalties shift, and he becomes a revolutionary, and he assassinates a guard, a prison or a slave guard or something like that. He performs an actual hit, a murder, to gain favor with this hardcore, radical, revolutionary group, because they would not trust him. They would not accept him as a Hebrew, because he had been raised with the Egyptians. He had been raised with the Goshen. After this point, the Goshen reject him. They are going to imprison him. They are probably going to execute him. He flees into the wilderness. Where does he originally flee? To the west. He goes to the west. Oh, sorry about this. He goes to the east. Sorry about that. He goes to the east. Where does he go to the east? What does he find in the east? He finds people. He finds the people of Florida. He finds people living in a multiracial society. The blacks are not slaves. This is the land of the Seminole Indian. This is the land of Florida. These are people who resort mostly to either sustenance, survival, foraging, the many wild fruits, fishing, raising small livestock like goats, etc. People without ambition for grand empires. People without ambition for sophistication. They are people who live simply, but they live independently. They have fortresses in the swamps. They have fortresses throughout Florida, and they survive from the gifts that God gives them. So at that point, he's allowed to get a bride, that he becomes grounded and learns not of the ways of the city, not of the ways of dynasties, not of the ways of kings and occultists and wizards, not of the ways of these empires, but he learns in the ways of real life, of living day to day, of being responsible for bathing, for your own household, for feeding yourself and your wife, for these communities, how families are constructed, what love truly is, what sacrifice truly is, what suffering, what going hungry truly means. It's there that he learns how to live. And his old self dies, and his new self, the new man, is born. And in this alchemical birth, he is spoken to by a burning bush. And in this burning bush, the voice that commanded, he taketh his people, and he flee with his people away from Pharaoh, is heard. Remember though, Florida also has dragons. It also has reptilians, lots of them. And where is the entrance to the subterranean world? In most of Native American mythology, in caves, caverns, and in these underground waterways, which Florida has an immensity of. Resuming his mission given to him by these draconic serpentine, Yahweh, the serpent, forces, he travels back to Egypt, now a much older person, with so much time having gone by, several decades, that all his old family, the patriarchs of his old family, are dead, and his brother, Ramses, is now the patriarch, Pharaoh. He's now the boss of bosses. He's now literally resumed the throne, inherited the Game of Thrones, the throne of Goshen, which is the Mississippi River Valley. And not Babylon. Babylon being its own independent system far enough away across the Appalachian Mountains to not interfere, right? But them being basically spiritually like allied. Goshen is this central heartland of the Ohio River Valley from the west of the newly dried interior seaway that is now being farmed, that is now being industrialized. Cities are being built, and they have been for the last 400 years. It's being settled, it's being filled with people. And it's mostly due to the labor and the success and the skill of the Semitic peoples in this highly skilled Masonic caste system, right? He goes back, performs his miracles, is there for the plagues which, for all intents and purposes, appear to be attacks from the great beyond, including the death of the firstborn child, through extremely intelligent ways, extraterrestrial origin, heavenly host origin, God, plague from God, angel of death. It's all in writing. These aren't natural disasters that he takes advantage of. It's not a scam. This is all like I said, from the original vision, a vision granted to him and enforced in its execution, as it's always been interpreted, by divine powers. Now, what divine powers, good or evil, that is to be decided. That is controversial. At this point, the Old Testament, many Gnostics believe the evil God is being allowed power. The evil God, the reptilian demiurge, Abba, the old man, Abraxas, the false God, who is the God of these Hebrews. The reptilian God, not the true God, the monotheistic all-God, Allah, that has created not only them, but the earth and the universe in which this cosmos of good and evil forces are playing out. But the will of Allah, of all good, ultimately is being manifested even by the subtle interchanges, the fluxes of control. For it's all an illusion in the creation, it's all in the hands of God. In fact, this could be to limit the power and rise of Goshen / Babylon. This could all be to cut them at the point where they would become the next evolutionary empire, the next empire that would become hostile, that would doom the world under its superpower. For no doubt, when these castes of Masonic laborers, these Semitic pyramid builders, these serpent-worshipping Hebrews, when they fled with Moses to the west, not the east, when they fled to the west and south, going down the coast, the Gulf Coast of Texas, into Mexico, into Acapulco Bay, into the Gulf of Campeche, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of Campeche, following the coast, following the mostly flooded but extremely shallow, walkable, yet not traversable by horse or chariot, beaches, shoreline, over 70 miles of sandy, ever-flooding, ever-changing shoreline, broken up by impassable waterways, saltwater lakes, and tall grasses that could easily be navigatable by determined people on foot, but impassable by anything heavier than a horse. This was the pathway, not the Red Sea, the Reed Sea. For along the Texas coast, there is a universal presence of tall, 10-foot tall grass. This coastal grassy plain, the coastal plain, is literally what they call that environmental ecosystem. It is a sea of reeds. If you're walking on Mustang Island right now, and no one had cut the grass since time began, you would see 10 to 15 foot tall fields, endless fields along the coast of grass. This would be right over the dunes, and the coast would allow the flat lands for most of your people, your carts of goods, etc., to travel and make great speed until you're pursued or chased. Then you can either go into the grasslands to hide or do something like light them on fire, for example. The strategic application of grass fires, wildfires, will not only provide a smoke screen, but many miles of uninterrupted, unbroken walls of fire. These are reported as happening as the cavalry of Ramses pursued Moses and the exodus of the Hebrews. Where? To the Red Sea. The splitting of the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, is oftentimes overemphasized. And what could have easily have been, and most likely was the depiction of men in a long line, a convoy, a caravan of pilgrims, walking across a very shallow, mud bay, like the Laguna Madre, where an optical effect would occur where you think these men were literally either walking on water or had caused some kind of magic to occur where the ocean was no longer deep and they were just walking on the bottom as if they had split it. Over time, this becomes the grand, elaborate depictions of Charleston Heston raising a staff and walking under hundreds of feet of ocean, which is held suspended by God on either side. And then when Pharaoh sees this, after them, and he follows, and then the ocean comes back and drowns the many men of Pharaoh, kills them all, right? No, what happened was, clearly when they saw from a distance the men walking across the Laguna Madre or the Oso Bay or any number of waterways between here and Louisiana, swampways, etc., the men on horseback tried to pursue, as ordered to by Pharaoh, got stuck in the mud, and had to turn around and come back. They found the areas impassable. It was like as if Moses was walking on the seafloor. If you go to one of these bodies of water, which fortunately I live by, and you walk out into the water, you will fall knee-deep into mud if you're not ready for it. But if you know what you're doing, you can either use the stones or a special type of maneuver, just walking on it, and competently walk literally across the entire bayfront of Oso Bay, the Laguna Madre, and the surrounding waterways of Mustang Island and North and South Padre Island. They're not more than 3 feet deep at their deepest in some spots. I think Oso Bay is at the deepest before dredging, like 6 feet. If you knew with pre-mapped out areas or just the skill of divine guidance or something, you could literally, with confidence, lead tens of thousands of people across these waterways on foot in no time and escape any pursuit of heavily armored chariots or horses or soldiers or whatever. They would be too heavy to follow you, especially if you made a point to travel light, specifically only with the clothes on your back. Remember, the Hebrews didn't have a lot of food. They didn't carry supplies. They didn't have oxen loaded with their possessions. That was a big point of the Exodus, because they left everything behind. Because if you're traveling on the coast, you're traveling on soft sand. Carts loaded with your clothes and furniture get stuck. People wearing sandals and the clothes on their back can walk for days. Now, where did the people get food during the Exodus? Doves and manna from heaven. There are also accounts on the coast of the Red Sea of God striking sea monsters with lightning bolts and issuing forth Leviathan to eat. In popular, in the mystical lore, these are always referred to as like giant squid that washed the shore, and the people of the Hebrews, the people of Israel, were able to eat. But they were also given dove, and they were given quail, and they were given manna. And that's a strange, specific bird to give them. Because you know what's common in Texas? You know what's so common in Texas and so abundant that people travel from all over the world to South Texas to hunt? Doves. Specifically, rock doves. You know what Texas also has a lot of? Quails. It's very odd that the Hebrews, the Semitic peoples, would prefer to eat dove and quail. And God, their God, and his infinite bounty and mercy, would give them huge flocks of doves and quails that would fall so heavily out of the sky. They'd be in such great abundance that the Hebrews would just stuff their pockets full of these birds. You know what Texas also has a lot of? Rattlesnakes. You know what the Exodus has a very, very specific story about? Poisonous snakes that were encountered by the Hebrews, who one morning were out collecting the doves and quails that they had grown so happy to eat and feast on. And God, deciding that the Hebrews were not respecting him enough, were not giving thanks for the bounty of doves and manna from heaven and quail, turned those birds, the quail and the doves, that they had put in their pockets, that they had in their hands, into poisonous snakes. Meaning that the former bounties that they were receiving of these game birds, these doves and these quails, turned into landscapes filled with poisonous snakes. And just as likely as they were to find eggs or nests or flocks of these delicious, gentle little birds to feast their little Hebrew stomachs on, to put in their Hebrew teeth and nosh on, they would find nests of these dangerous, super venomous, bronze snakes, these rattlesnakes, whose scales sound like the shaking of metal. The rattlesnake is probably one of the more terrifying and intimidating encounters you could have, especially if you're not wearing closed-toed shoes, especially if you're wearing a bunch of sandals and you're walking around in big skirts or robes or whatever the hell they wore. So many people were bitten by these rattlesnakes that almost the entirety of the original Exodus died as a result of venomous snake bites through this harsh and unforgiving landscape. So many people died from venomous snake bites, which is really, really, it makes so much sense. If you live here, yeah, chances are a snake was going to kill you. That's such a Texan reality. That's such a Texas aspect of all of this. They died of thirst. They experienced great thirst. They died so much that their high priest, Aaron, created the Caduceus from his rod and the two coiled copper snakes, invoking a deity that they had encountered of healing in their many journeys. And not, oh sorry, this is clearly not Yahweh the Elohim, the God of the Word. This is a brazen serpent. This is a serpentine totem, a fetish, to request the healing protection of the God of serpents, their Yahweh, the dragon. Sorry, that's what I meant to say. This was clearly not the disembodied Alpha and Omega that they wish you to believe, but a specific call, a creation of an idol, not of the Babylonian bull, not of the golden calf, but of the serpent god of the Hebrews, to keep them safe from these poisonous asps, as they called them, which were most likely rattlesnakes. There is a fun fact between many of the rivers. The Oasis River, I believe, is the one where it starts, the Oasis River, and the Rio Grande River. The Rio Grande and the Oasis River, they're roughly 300 miles apart. And there is very little else in the way of drinkable fresh water in between these two bodies of water, these two rivers. It is this stretch of land that I believe an episode of the Exodus occurred where the Hebrews were suffering from so severe of thirst that Aaron had to use his rod to douse, literally to hit a stone and to cause a stream of water to erupt forth. This, I believe, occurred in this stretch between the Oasis River and the Rio Grande River. This is such a severely drought-stricken area that the first time the Spanish tried to settle this area with pilgrims and with colonists, they died of thirst on their travels. The pirate Prince Jean Lafayette, his men suffered similar thirst issues, having no way to resupply themselves with fresh water in between this no-man's land of the Oasis River and the Rio Grande, and were forced to exit the shore, travel inland 20 miles, and dig a well. This is the exact type of behavior you have to resort to. You have to literally dig into the earth itself. You have to break the stone itself to access water underneath the ground. And by the way, if I haven't brought the name Moses up, it's because during the Exodus, and many people will know this, during the Exodus, Moses is either the spiritual shaman directly engaged with vision quests, aka creating the laws and transcribing the events in the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses that become the Torah, including Deuteronomy and what we know as Leviticus. Aaron is literally the high priest of Moses, who is the messenger, the high prophet. Aaron is the leader of the people. Aaron is literally the people's go-to emissary, the middleman between Moses, who connects with God, the vision of the dragon, who is spoken to with the burning bush, and again will speak to God in a pillar of fire on Mount Sinai, at this point bringing the 10 Commandments. It was exposure at this point that was reported to change his hair white. It's clear radiation exposure. It's clear communication with either extraterrestrials, ultra-terrestrials, or just plain fucking UFOs. And it's clear that whatever occurred ultimately killed him. Because it's not soon after this event that Moses literally exits the Exodus, finds a mountain peak, and dies there. He himself, Moses himself, never reaches Israel. He never reaches the promised land. He does not get to join them in it. This is how long their journey takes. This is how hard and severe their journey takes, how much hardship they endure. At the same time, this is how much physical damage he had to endure communicating directly with this higher power. And like the Cash Landrum, UFO survivors of close encounters with UFOs often report radiation illness, or even a higher frequency of cancers. They can do everything from absolutely mess up your immune system to physically burning you with extreme heat, to be too close to one of these extraterrestrial craft or beings. Aaron, on the other hand, and his priests, risen from the Exodus survivors, their hardships, which have created new miracles, new mythologies, new legends, and the symbolic factors of the serpent, and surviving the wilderness of this no man's land of desert coast, including surviving wars, surviving the enemies of their god, their serpent god, the enemy of serpents in the local Isis worshipping kingdoms, like the kingdom of Jericho. The kingdom of Jericho, it was where we now know the city of Rockwall, Texas. The archaeological megalithic remnants of the walled city of Rockwall, Texas, are the biblical location of the city of Jericho. Remember, the people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, the people of Israel, who would become the people of Israel, the 12 tribes of the Hebrews, of the Semitic peoples, each from a patriarch, from a son of Abraham, they worship serpents. They worship the dragonic lord of all serpents, Yahweh. The people of Jericho worship Isis. They worship Isis and are enemies of the serpents. It is at this point, when they travel through the lands of the Isis worshippers of Texas, the Lone Star of Texas is ancient and represents the worship of Isis. They are either taken as slave in the early parts of this engagement, or they are forced to fight. And they fight in these ongoing skirmishes where they use the knowledge both of Abraham and of Goshen to defeat their enemies. One such tactic they use is sonic weaponry, as well as intimidation and religious zealotry. They enter a type of berserk combat state, thinking that their God literally marches with them. They have weapons of mass destruction, as well as psychological force multipliers like the Ark of the Covenant, and are led into battle by their very religious leaders. The city of Jericho falls. Many tribes that they encounter fall. They slaughter their enemies to a man. They take not prisoner, nor take livestock as trophy. Everything, every animal, every person is put to the sword. They call their enemies Amalek. In fact, there is a lot internally with the divisions and the constant demands from the God of the Hebrews and the Hebrew patriarchs themselves. The Hebrew patriarchs view the dragonic Yahweh God as too extreme, as too strict, as too inflexible, as too demanding. And yet the priest class never gives quarter, never makes a compromise. In fact, they push for even more severe wars with these tribes that they are encountering, ever pushing and refusing to settle for anything less than the city in the vision given to them in the northern snow-covered lands of their former territories. The original visions given to the people of Abraham, from their visions of this draconic Yahweh God, of a city in the middle of a lake, where an island in the middle of a lake, where a cactus grows, and on this cactus, an eagle eats a serpent. That is the vision that has inspired the last 400 years of bond slavery to Goshen, ascension through a caste system into a prestigious elite status, second only to the Pharaoh and his clan, his kin. The self-imposed escape/exile from this land of Goshen, as well as the exodus through hostile wilderness that was so extreme that the original generation that had been born in Goshen and fled Goshen dies, completely dies in this exodus, in this wilderness. Their children, their descendants, carrying them into Mexico, having to battle and defeat fortress cities like Jericho, and destroy and massacre all the tribes that they encountered in this land of Amalek, until they reach, ultimately, where Acapulco is. And from this Acapulco area, they begin to set up the coastal kingdoms in the lush and verdant tropical paradise, but still are driven to find the city of theirs, the sacred city. And upon moving to the central mountains, remember, navigating this entire time, biblically, what we would call the Canaanites, the Philistines, the Hittites, the Turks, the Syrians, the Lebanese, the Moabites, this is how the Bible describes these local people, right? These people who have established kingdoms. They're not Hebrews. They do not worship the Hebrew God. They are hostile to the Hebrews, yet they are incapable of either enslaving or defeating the Hebrews in war. They are incapable of overpowering the Hebrews, and they have to accept these strangers who are either nomadic, refusing to stay in any one spot permanently, or they are building communities inside these pre-existing homelands. At this point, they start coexisting, they start intermingling, they start interconnecting between the 12 tribes of the Hebrews and these different various nations. In fact, they start converting. They start converting the locals to this serpent-worshipping cult. Remember, they have chosen to live on the coasts where Acapulco and central Mexico are, the Gulf of Campeche. This is a paradise to them. This becomes the Israel Valley. This becomes the coast of Israel, basically what we know is the Israel coast. Israel, where it is now, this would be the coast of the Middle East. This would be that pocket between Turkey and Egypt, that little bend, that little area. And this is where geographically they're able to basically flip all of the events that happen in Mexico, all of the events that happen in the New World, at this time, the founding of the city of Israel, city of Jerusalem, in Israel, in the Israel Valley, the Jezreel Valley, and the southern kingdoms of Judea and the northern kingdoms of Israel. All of this founding, the end of the Exodus, the culmination of the Exodus, all of that happens in central Mexico and the coasts of the west and the east, or specifically the east coast. All of that happens truly in North America, but specifically in Mexico, and specifically the city of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem is that city that we know as Tenochtitlan. That these people, remember these Semitic people, these Hebrews, who we would now conventionally know their journey from the northlands of Wisconsin and Michigan all the way down south to central Mexico as the Aztecs. That's right. In conventional anthropology, the Aztecs are a people who migrated from North America all the way down south to central Mexico. In conventional history, archaeological anthropology, the Aztecs did so. They made this migration on a vision quest given to them by their gods. A spiritual vision was given to their priest class to find a city marked by an eagle eating a snake on a cactus on an island in the middle of a lake. And the Aztec peoples walked from a now unknown origin in the northern lands all the way down North America, battling strange tribes, dealing with hardship, surviving generation after generation as nomads, following a religious quest to find the promised land and the city given to these chosen people by their God. That is 100% the conventional archaeological, anthropological origin story of the Aztecs. They arrived to Mexico that was already populated with native peoples of the Mayan, of the Toltec, of the Olmec, of various other indigenous peoples. Themselves the descendants of a former golden age, themselves only living in the ruins of the golden age's cities. They were living in the shadows of a long dead empire. These Aztecs were not weak, and in fact it was such power of faith and spirituality and warfare, not only invaded but conquered most of these tribes. The tribes they could not conquer, they converted to their serpent religion, the religion of the cult of the western phoenix, of the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl. They founded Tenochtitlan, which was already a city in the middle of a lake on an island. But they promoted it, and it grew into the strongest, most advanced, most populated city in all of Mexico and all of the Western world. The legends of its streets paved with gold were not entirely over-exaggerations. Precious stones, ample food, the finest textiles, the most wealthiest of merchants, the most powerful and mightiest of warriors and armies, all originated from the city, ruled by an individual tribe of foreigners from lands far to the north, that not only struck terror, but demanded submission from all the tribes that they viewed as enemies of their one true God. All the former cults of different Mayan and Mexican deities were considered false gods, or gods of evil, oftentimes accused of human sacrifice. The hallmark of Quetzalcoatl was a refusal of human sacrifice. A hallmark of Yahweh, the God of Abraham, is a similar refusal and rejection of human sacrifice. In both cults of Quetzalcoatl and Yahweh, and these are the only two cults in all of the ancient world, human sacrifice is considered taboo and outlaw. It is highly illegal, spiritually and socially, to engage. It is heretical, it is blasphemous, it is sinful to engage in human sacrifice under any circumstance, and is the antithesis of worshiping and obeying the commands of Yahweh, Jehovah, Allah, or Quetzalcoatl. No doubt, these are the same deities, or deities created to point towards the same fundamental spiritual direction. And this higher spiritual God, this motivator, this director, this commander, had chosen tribes to carry in a specific spiritual seed that would come to fruition and be planted through the genealogies to follow within the same territories, but at a much later date. In fact, 14 generations later, from the arrival of the Aztecs, the creation of Tenochtitlan, to the time of the god emperors that would return, just like the Veracucian, just like the Noahide, return as men with blue eyes to this world and restore balance and order, not through a physical purge of evil, but a spiritual purge of evil, an eradication of the reptilian legacy over the souls of men. But now that we've covered the Exodus, we end our episode having established Jerusalem as the city of Tenochtitlan, having established the people of the Hebrews, the people of Israel, the people of Yahweh, as the serpent-worshipping people of Quetzalcoatl, the Aztecs, and their journey across America to a place and a city given to them by their God in a vision, that which will become Mexico City, that which is the true geographical location of the biblical city of Jerusalem, the city of the sun. What is in Jerusalem? The pyramid of the sun. So there we have the merger between sun worship, which will become the solar deities, the solar presentation of the sun, the return to the heavenly authorities of the cosmos, away from the reptilian serpent worshipping societies of the ancient reptilian order, with a bridge that intersects serpent worship, dragon worship, and sky worship. The pro-human, anti-human sacrifice, Quetzalcoatl worship, the sky serpent worship, the feathered serpent worship of the Aztecs, which creates the biblically accurate serpent worshipping temples in Jerusalem of the earliest Hebrews and the Israelite tribes that settled the Israel Valley, that converted the southern kingdoms of Judea, and they themselves warred with and traveled into the northern Assyrian wastelands. We'll get into the Assyrian wastelands next episode as we talk about the fate of Israel, biblical Israel, which is actually the fate of Mexico. We'll talk about the fate of the Canaanites, which are actually the Mexicans. Now that we have introduced the Quetzalcoatl Israelite tribes, now that we've introduced the sky serpents into these Canaanite kingdoms, which perform human sacrifice, which perform ritual cannibalism, which worship dark underworld gods in their cenotes, the underworld of Zeboba, whose Canaanite deities have an even more ancient lineage than that of even Moloch, or Isis, or Ra, as worshipped by the Atlantean colonists in the new lands of the east of Africa, of Europe, of the Mediterranean. For in the central Mexican valley is to occur the history of the true people of God, as these lands have a date with destiny, which is the arrival of the kingdom of Christ, which will liberate us all by destroying this kingdom, by destroying their temples, and by ending their priest class. So in the next episode, we'll get after the formation of Israel, formation of Jerusalem, Tenochtitlan, the reigns of these kings, the eventual taking over enslavement by Babylon, and then the eventual return of the Christ kingdom. And I'll explain a little bit more in its own episode how that came to be in these eastern colonies. So thank you all very much. I'll talk about how Israel scattered to the wasteland of northern Assyria. I'll talk about how Babylon from the east coast of the Atlantic seaboard invades Mexico. I'll talk about all of that and how that coincides with the rewriting of history and everything. We have about 3 more episodes to go. This one, and then there'll be the Christ Kingdom, all about that East Coast, and then I'll talk about the modernization, the rewriting of history, the cover-up by the Freemasons, the inversion of all truth, the right versus left, up versus down, good versus evil, etc., the black and the white, checkerboard, all that good shit. Talk about about 3 more episodes to cover this entire TEX saga. This is the 3rd installment from the Exodus, from start the Exodus and the creation of Israel. So yeah, thank you very much for tuning in to this broadcast. Thank you very much for giving me your attention. If you've been this far, consider donating, consider supporting, and everything. God bless you. Peace out.